In today's video, I'm going to show you how we helped my client Martin, aged 65, get into the best shape of his life and feel 15 years younger, in his words, turning his health completely around in less than 5 months without sacrificing time in his business and while traveling multiple times every month throughout the program. If you're a man over 35 dealing with brain fog, low energy, stubborn body fat, or just feeling older than you should, and you just can't understand why you're struggling to get into the shape you want to be in despite doing everything you think you should be doing, then this video is for you. When Martin came to us, he was 64, running multiple businesses, a production company, a portfolio of Airbnb properties, and working as a part-time actor. He has 4 kids and multiple grandkids, so he's managing a level of demand and responsibility that most men half his age don't have. And to be honest, he'd always looked after himself. Compared to the average man, he was ahead of the curve. He trained, he ate well, he took it seriously. But then his 60s hit. His energy plummeted. He was waking up more tired than when he went to bed, crashing earlier and earlier every single day, unable to show up at his best in work or at the level of productivity he was used to across his entire life. He was bloated after every meal. His doctor told him this was normal for his age and prescribed him PPI medication. His joints were hurting to the point he could barely bend down without his lower back and knees hurting. He was becoming more and more immobile every single year. And then there was the brain fog, crippling brain fog that would leave him essentially paralyzed in work, reading the same email 4 times over, trying to make sense of it. He'd find himself squinting at spreadsheets for hours, trying to take in the information that would have in the past just gone straight in. He was completely unable to focus and unable to drive the things he needed driving forward in his businesses. And he'd done the obvious thing. He'd been to his doctor, he'd had the standard tests run, he'd had his 50th MOT health check, he'd had his 60th MOT health check, and nothing meaningful ever showed up beyond a few light markers out of sync. And the recommendation every single time was another medication, something he knew was a slippery slope. By the time he came to us, he was getting texts from his GP to start statins, recommendations to start blood pressure medication, and recommendations to start PPIs for his gut. None of it was the route that he wanted to take. And despite his doctors telling him that this was all just part of normal aging, he knew deep down that this wasn't how he wanted to live the next 10, 15, or even 20 years of his life. That's when he came to Alpha 21. The first thing we did was run a comprehensive functional blood panel, not the standard NHS panel, a panel that looks at more than 55 different markers across every single major system in the body. Hormones, thyroid, inflammation, metabolic markers, nutrient status, gut markers, everything. Then we analyze those markers through the optimal health ranges, not the conventional reference ranges your GP uses, which are based on statistical averages of an already declining population. The difference between those 2 ranges is the difference between you're not diseased yet and you're actually healthy. Here's what we found on Martin's blood panel. Finding number 1, his testosterone was on the floor, sitting at 12 nanomoles, regarded as normal for his age by his GP, but far from optimal for functioning male physiology. The functional optimal range for a healthy adult male sits between 24 and 32 nanomoles, and he was nowhere near. By that measure, Martin was running on under half of what his body was designed to operate at. And this explained everything. The drop in drive, the crashing energy, the brain fog, the slower recovery, the body composition shift that he could not change. Finding 2, his gut. And this is the one that mattered the most in so many ways. Martin's doctor had been about to medicate him with PPIs for what they assumed was excess stomach acid because he was dealing with painful reflux and bloating after every meal that he ate. The actual finding was the opposite. He had low stomach acid, something called hypochlorhydria. Low stomach acid causes acid reflux. It causes the burping after meals he was experiencing. It causes bloating, and critically, it sets off a cascade of issues downstream because you can't break down protein properly, you can't absorb minerals like zinc and magnesium, and you develop intestinal inflammation, as you can see here on Martin's pictures from his ballooned belly. And gut inflammation like this drives systemic inflammation, which then leads to joint pain. It then leads to nutrient depletion. It leads to fatigue, low mood, and hormonal decline. Every symptom he was experiencing was downstream of this. Finding number 3, his cholesterol. His GP had looked at a basic cholesterol panel and said everything was fine apart from slightly elevated LDL. When we ran a comprehensive lipid panel looking at ApoB, LDL particle number, and small dense LDL and more, the picture completely changed. He was at a materially elevated cardiovascular risk, but the standard panel had completely missed it because it doesn't test for these markers. Finding number 4, multiple nutrient deficiencies: magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, each one downstream consequences for energy, recovery, hormonal function, and cognition. Once we'd run the diagnostics, we then cross-referenced every one of these markers against a symptoms screening of over 300 individual symptoms, which is something we do with every single client. The picture was unambiguous. What Martin was experiencing wasn't aging. It was the compounding cost of dysfunctions that had been invisible to standard medicine for years. His internal systems were burnt out, inefficient, operating well below the baseline, and nobody had ever looked at them properly. What we did next is important because the order really matters. We didn't start with testosterone. We didn't put him on TRT. We didn't reach for the testosterone boosters. We started with the foundation of everything, his gut. Here's why. Nutrient absorption is the foundation of every other intervention. You can take the best supplement stack on earth, but if your stomach acid is depleted and your small intestines are inflamed, you're not absorbing anything. You're literally just producing expensive urine. Phase 1 was all about rebuilding digestive function. Here's a rough overview of what this looked like for Martin. Firstly, stomach acid support. Apple cider vinegar before meals to stimulate gastric acid production. Fresh ginger with meals to support motility and digestive secretions. And a short-term HCl and pepsin supplement used as scaffolding while we restored his natural stomach acid production. Then we looked at his eating habits, making sure he's chewing properly, slowing down. The first stage of digestion is mechanical and is done in the mouth. Most men don't even give this a second thought. They inhale their food, and this is guaranteed to create digestive issues downstream. Then we looked at pancreatic support. Digestive enzymes to help him break down proteins, fats, and carbohydrates while his system recovered. Once we knew he was absorbing nutrients properly, we laid in supplementation to fill all of the gaps that we could see on his blood work. A methylated B complex to address the compromised red blood cell function we saw on his panel, zinc to address the deficiency, and the order of this really matters because you can't absorb zinc or B12 without sufficient stomach acid. If we'd have given him either of those supplements before fixing the gut, it would have simply gone straight through him. We then recommended 2 forms of magnesium. Magnesium glycinate at night to support nervous system recovery and sleep architecture, and magnesium L-threonate to support cognitive function because it's the form that crosses the blood-brain barrier. For testosterone, we didn't reach for a testosterone booster like Tonka Ali or Fedosia agrestis. We addressed the root causes. High cortisol from chronic stress, the gut inflammation, and we supported fat digestion, which is essentially the building blocks for testosterone, by including supplements like TUDCA, NAC, and ox bile. Then we adjusted his diet. Higher fats, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate intake initially. Higher fat because, as I've just said, cholesterol and saturated fats are the literal building blocks for sex hormones like testosterone. You cannot build healthy hormones from a fat-deficient diet. We started him on lower carbs initially because his triglycerides, HbA1c, and fasting glucose were all trending in the wrong direction, showing that he wasn't tolerating carbohydrates well, so we needed to restore insulin sensitivity first before we could fuel performance with higher carbs. Now, most coaches coaches would have put a 65-year-old man with low testosterone and high cortisol into a 5-day-a-week training program because they don't have the data. That, given the underlying issues we'd seen, would have made Martin 10 times worse. But with the right data in hand around Martin's biology, we gave him a full body strength training split just 3 times per week. Outside of that, it was simple daily activity, walking while he's on his business calls, high step count wherever possible, and movement built around his work, not bolted on top of it. His training intensity was deliberately moderate to factor in his below baseline recovery capabilities. We literally told him to leave 2 to 3 reps in reserve on every set, never training to failure. Here's the mechanism behind why we did this. When testosterone is suppressed and cortisol is elevated, training to failure pushes the body further into a catabolic high cortisol state. The body simply can't recover. You lose muscle, accumulate fatigue, and drive the dysfunction deeper. This is why so many guys end up pushing themselves until they hit burnout and fall off the wagon. Leaving reps in reserve allowed him to produce a high training stimulus without exceeding his recovery capacity, which kept him in an anabolic state and allowed his hormonal system to respond and recover after each session. Within just 6 weeks on this protocol, his bloating and gut symptoms were completely gone. Not improved, gone. Because we targeted the actual cause of the issues: low stomach acid, poor fat absorption, high stress, and intestinal inflammation. We didn't just mask the symptom, we dealt with the root issue. At week 6, he said to me, "I've never felt so good in my life." A whole 35 of the initial symptoms he ticked on day 1 had resolved by week 6, and he was already feeling like a new man. His carbohydrate tolerance was improving. We saw it on his markers and we saw it in his recovery. So we adjusted. We dropped fat slightly as his hormones improved. We pushed protein higher because his digestion could now handle it. We brought carbohydrates back in, particularly around his training pre and post session. And this is when the physical transformation really began to take shape. Here's the part that surprises most people. Martin didn't lose 15 to 20 kilos. He lost around 8. The difference in how he looks is not weight, it's body composition. Muscle preserved and built, fat lost, inflammation gone, posture corrected. By week 12, he was a different person. We booked him in for a photo shoot at week 16, something he'd never have considered doing 5 months earlier, and the physical change you can see is the smallest part of what he actually achieved. The biggest results were in how he operates, his presence with his kids, with his grandkids, his ability to focus and drive his multiple businesses forward, the drive he'd lost firing again on all cylinders. And most incredibly, the confidence he has in himself that he can still operate at his best for the next 10, 15, 20 years and beyond. He went from a downward spiral he didn't think he could exit to feeling better than he has in 15 years. And this happened in less than 5 months. This is what happens when you approach a transformation with data. If any of Martin's story sounds familiar, here's what to take away. 1, normal for your age is not a diagnosis. It's a sentence used when standard testing has nothing to offer. Standard reference ranges are built from statistical averages of an already declining population. Sitting inside that range tells you almost nothing. It just tells you that you're not diseased yet. It doesn't tell you if you're healthy, and it certainly doesn't tell you if you are optimal. 2, test more than your GP does. We run a test that looks at 55 different markers across every single biological system. Your GP is probably only looking at around 10 to 15. This does not give you anywhere near the full picture of what's really going on inside your body. 3, if you have gut symptoms, bloating, reflux, burping after meals, irregular bowel movements, do not assume this is excess stomach acid before testing. In men over 40, low stomach acid is significantly more common than high, and PPIs prescribed against low stomach acid just make the underlying problem much, much worse. Number 4, address gut function before chasing hormonal interventions. Testosterone support, supplementation, and any other nutritional protocol all depend on absorption. If the gut isn't functioning, you're putting money and effort into a system that can't use what you're actually giving it. Number 5, match training intensity to your recovery capacity, not to what looks impressive on social media. If your cortisol is high and your testosterone is low, training to failure 5 days a week will make you worse, not better. Martin's case is not unusual. It's the rule, not the exception, for men over 35 who feel like something is off and have been told it's their age. The blood work to identify what's actually happening exists. The framework to correcting it exists too. The reason most men never find either is that the system they're relying on isn't looking. So if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in Martin's starting point, the fatigue that wasn't there before, the weight that won't shift no matter what you do, the brain fog becoming a daily guarantee, the feeling of being older than you actually are, there is a fix for this. The first step is understanding what's actually happening inside your body as it is today. The link in the description will take you to a video where I break down exactly how our blood optimization system works, what we test for, and how we use it to produce results like Martin's and all of these other men. If after watching it, you want to know how this would apply to you specifically, you can book a free functional health assessment call with the team from there. If you're not ready for that, however, just hit subscribe because I publish videos like this every single week, breaking down exactly how to use clinical data to take control of your health properly. See you in the next video.